wonder often about the narrative aspect of our instrument's expression. Lyrics less, mood defining. We associate the lyrics of our imagination if we do. What is meaningful compared to what is just reflective about the mood or upon the mood? Do we want to say something that each syllable has a meaning if it were lyric with lyrics? Sounds like Morse code. But if you practice the melody on a repeated note, you shrink it to its essence, which is pulse, in a way, repetitivity, obviously. But because when you sing, you can repeat on the same note the note of the pitch, but you change syllables and you say something which then, by its meaning, narratively, directly, calls for your attention for as much as you can understand the language in which it's said. After all, it's communicative, it's purposeful, it's meaningful. If you say, I like to tell you how much, you don't think, oh, I'm repeating the notes, because you're listening to how much what, and then you go, I love you, but alas, and you go, oh, but alas, what happened? So in other words, you enter in a storytelling from the point of view of the listener who wants to be told the storytelling. Would it be a film, a game, a theater play, or a book? The actor becomes the narrator, but at the same time becomes the figure that narrates. So the narrator is the writer who's removed, mostly dead. The performer is alive, who is telling the story, which is not his or hers, but has to immerse themselves in the storytelling to make it believable by the listener who wants to believe in it. Cannot constantly say, I don't say that, but I don't know what I'm saying, I'm just saying it because it's written. And the notation itself doesn't speak, so it becomes alive when we play it or somebody plays it. And then we don't even think about who wrote it if we don't know, and it doesn't really matter because the work exists on its own as a message, or a mood message, or a character message, or psychological message, or any kind of message. And I think this universality of the storytelling through an instrument that doesn't have lyrics, which in parentheses amuses me often because most of the music is listened today formatted in 3-minute songs, and non-classical musicians often refer, for lack of better vocabulary, and not because they're uninterested or not knowledgeable, they just refer it to a song, even if it's a piece, as we call it in classical music. Classical musicians would understand what I mean. But it's okay, it's not at all to make fun of the fact that those who are not into classical music, regardless what they call it, they can refer to it for what it means to them, as the content or the intent of the composer, whoever wrote it. The performer on the spot becomes the present performer, composer of it, or narrator of it, appropriating the storytelling and not disclosing exactly which one. Of course, the atmosphere and the syncopation and the mood of the minor mode. This is Evocación by Albeniz in the book 1 of Iberia. We feel a sense of emotional, perhaps retrospection, some kind of course, nostalgia. And we have the grace notes. Then we have the repetitivity. Forgive me for that wrong alteration. It's, by the way, in A flat minor, but some publishers now also do it in G sharp minor in harmonically. pianists don't have preference, but I guess generally sharp keys are easier in complex tonalities than flats. For some reason, perhaps it's just the way musical grammar solfège is taught. And sometimes it's relative pitch, it doesn't matter if it's always do if it were, like the movable do. And of course some composers specifically choose a tonality not only for the mood, which partly could be, but also because of the instrumental clarinets, flutes, different instruments have different fingerings and tonalities in which they're more natural to play, like a B-flat clarinet compared to a F French horn. But these are technical reasons. After all, most string players like sharp keys, but it happens to be that Strauss wrote a violin and piano sonata in E-flat major, which is not a tonality for a string instrument. Usually it's for the brass or the winds in general, perhaps the woodwinds. And so anyway, so the choice of the tonality is whatever it is. We don't know why it's not. Of course, then depends on the tuning. Okay, let's not diverge too much, I usually do, and remain on what the piece is. Syncopation in the accompaniment, that is sort of a slow-paced dance, the baila section of Spanish music compared to the canta section, the song versus the dance. Of course, if it was fast, the dance part of it appears more obvious, but here it's stretched and slow, reminiscence of something from the past, perhaps, for him. He almost died, well, he did, actually, unfortunately, not almost die. Sadly for me, for us, for musicians, he died in 1909, and kidney failure, water retention, he suffered a lot, and he wasn't old in our days. But the point is that he wrote the whole Iberia representing some kind of a musical, obviously, painting, depiction of the character of the different Spanish cities, mostly South Spain in this case of his, but anyway. And he opens the whole set with this remembrances, yeah. So we know that from the title, we know that from the tempo, we know that from the texture. It's the same key in which Mussorgsky wrote the nostalgic Mussorgsky's pictures, obviously is his. Interesting redundancy. Of the old castle in the pictures. It's probably coincidental. So how much we overplay the expression and how much we should downplay it. If it was orchestral, you would imagine double bass, cello, viola, and perhaps an instrument that has a different timbre, the color, rather than the dynamic range. On the piano is all one single timbre, so you do shadows and lights. But on the orchestration, you can have some sharper sound, like perhaps English horn, or perhaps clarinet. And so it would appear to be not louder, not darker, not brighter, but just different, as if you had different keyboard that could play different synthesized sound, or perhaps the voice itself. How much I like to think with this, something. And of course, the grace notes are unmeasured, which is the purpose of them. Some people in Baroque call them embellishments. I still think there is a meaning to them more than just supplanting the length of decay or lack of. And not only, but pianists wrongly assume so. It's always like that when you try to think in the sense of the people who thought in their time period. They couldn't have imagined the piano, so they didn't miss it. I often think of that, but factually, an instrument like the piano can play perhaps in the wrong stylistic articulation and phrasing and display a Baroque piece, but a harpsichordist wouldn't play a Rachmaninoff concerto on it for obvious reasons. And so some instruments are more universal, like the piano, but then in a way they lose the acuity of the stylistic je ne sais quoi. So we sort of, more than narrate the storytelling, we also translate or perhaps transliterate the storytelling. And because there isn't a single story that is defined by a lyrics, then it becomes mood setting, tone painting. And you observe how cleverly, well, obviously, how intelligently, most politely, the composer in place implements the harmonization with a fifth or a sixth without the third, not to overwhelm the soft singing of the melody, but in syncopation so that most of them fit between the notes of the melody. So you can hear if you combine them. And they're not uncombined either, because he didn't write it on different ranges where you clearly cannot combine them, even unwillingly. But as a listener, it's meant to be so intimately inside the middle range. And it gives that sense of completion more than separation or partization of the elements. But of course, the piano is single timbre, so it makes this cohesive sound. And so I think the grace notes need to be spread, because I think they're before the beat, but they're also, well, I don't have to think, I feel, and therefore I try to make sure I think. It's provocative. No, it's just humble. Sometimes you learn theory to justify your intuition. And sometimes on the way to learning too much about music theory, you lose your intuition. Perhaps ignorance is bliss. But sometimes good knowledge put on the side can allow to advance in a cultivated, intuitive way. It's a good combination. At least I think it's rewarding when it's achieved. No irony in this, but it's just the true humility. I mean, we all try to put all it together, right? The mood, the atmosphere, the technique, the expression, the instrument, the pedal, the phrasing, the direction, the narrative, the line, the style, all that. Perhaps we drop ingredients on the way. It's too much things to think at the same time. We need more brains. But when you know the piece enough, any piece enough, it becomes your expression. Of course, there's nothing wrong to appropriate it, even if, well, it makes your personal touch. That's why people like to hear a piece by somebody rather than anybody, or they don't like it by that somebody else. Or perhaps as amateurs, they learn it on their own to enjoy it by themselves. That used to be the 19th century. But technology allows us to be surrounded by many things that we cannot do, but we can enjoy anytime. So to go back to this expression, the melodic note on the beats of the 3/4 lands on every bass note together. Alfred Cortot in the 30s started imagining expression for Chopin mostly, where the dislocation between the bass note and the melody allows the melodic note to blossom on its own without to be sort of cancelled or completed, if you want, whichever way you look at it, empty or half empty, full glass. If you do, of course, applied as a trick, it becomes an effect, and then it becomes a cheap trick, sorry to say. I don't mean that he did it on each first beat, nor that he was cheap. That's what you call charisma. Perhaps Chopin did it himself. As Cortot told us, supposedly Chopin was saying to his students, ignore with the right hand what your left hand does, or something of that. In fact, all these effects are ingredients, but not the essence. The essence is simple. When you play it fast like this, you can see directly where it leads every time. When you stretch it and you syncopate the accompaniment, and on the piano you don't have a bow to change, or how many notes you can put in one bow, and you don't have intonation, in tune or out of tune, unless you can tune it, which unfortunately I can't. Should have learned that too, instead of fugues and contrapoint. But anyway, choices were made when I was a child. And most of us don't tune their pianos, unlike harpsichordists or violinists, obviously. But okay, let's say beyond that, we choose little of what we play on, more or less, sometimes more than less, but ultimately there's something to say through the piece. And that's all that matters. You don't have to define it, you have to explain it, you just do it. And so charismatically, to some it can appear an exaggeration as an effect to delay, like in Chopin. So who's to say that in the notation, which is right to play, and here, it's not about right or wrong, it's about what are the values that you want to bring into the piece through its storytelling. For instance, in the aria of the slow movement of the Bach Italian concerto, again, being on a keyboard instrument, of course, that was the harpsichord for Bach's time, or the tempi can be on the modern piano artificially, for some tastelessly, stretched because of the decay delay that is longer. So we don't have the limitation of the breath or the change of bow, which, by the way, is not a limitation. It's beautiful. I want to sing this and that, and then breathe before I say that. And of course, the tempo then matters in order to maintain the capacity to project the sound while exhaling, just like any wind instrument as well as singers, obviously, but string players do too. Piano is basically exhaling at the get-go, but slower than other instruments, so you can pick it up where it dropped before the next. And at some point, it'll be silent because you drop and it decays more. Not in the concert hall, you wouldn't hear it. I'm recording with a mic and the piano, you would, but then what's the point? Of course, I like the idea of intimacy because it's in the expression. When you say something meaningful to somebody, that might scare you because it involves trust and perhaps giving of your own and receiving something, usually love or friendship or any kind of meaningful exchange. It's usually said intimately because it's meaning so much that it scares us to say it, like life, death, love, all what our finitude makes us yearn towards. how to deal with it, how to... Of course, spirituality helps for those who do, but regardless, the idea of the intimacy means that you project from the intimate of what you think this piece means, without the lyrics, your storytelling, and what the listener who will receive it will feel or perceive. So of course you can influence them with his affect. By delaying the melodic notes so that it doesn't play together with the bass. But in any case, the bass repeats itself every 3 beats because of the decay of the ostinato on A flat or G sharp. The melody doesn't function by 3 beats, it's just separated by slices of bars, but it goes beyond at least 4 bars and still continuing on the 5th until the 8th, and still not finished. It's like a run-on sentence. The accompaniment is in 3, with or without hairpin. And just like Chopin, whom obviously Albéniz knew well, like most composers know their predecessors, just learn from them rather than learn how to compose. You learn from how they did, then you do what you feel, and then perhaps you learn from their trade. I don't remember exactly the notes, but he repeats it. And so many composers do that. Like Franck in the sonata, and immediately again, but this time in the tonic. It's not redundancy, it is expression of tenderness, perhaps of endearment. That's what I meant when I said earlier, meaningful things are told softly. It's not natural to say something meaningful loudly, unless it's some kind of a statement or an ideology. And here we proceed from what we perceive from the piece to the listener who knows or doesn't know the piece. And so we become the vector for this listener of the piece. And so if we do... we feel like, okay, that was enough. That's symmetry that reproduces it. He should have perhaps done something different that follows this opening statement instead of rehashing it. But that's when it's the dangerous situation for the performers, interpreters, translators that we are. Let's do something. I'm saying that with tender irony, because many times I was told that. To do something different because, implement it, it might be boring to the listener. So why do you play it in the first place? Trust your masterpiece. Well, funny statement, at least funnily said. What I mean is that if the composer or the writer or the author or the poet wrote a redundancy of a word, it's with a meaning. It's not just repeated. It's almost developed while repeated. It's like variations. I think and I believe more than even when I was intuitive child in music, now that I'm an old man who has learned a lot about the craftsmanship of music, that if a composer does that, it doesn't have to be automatically in their hope something different, as if we have to save it from being boring. I mean, of course, my vocabulary expressing this is not subtle enough. I would say the innuendo, the hint, the emotional expression through your own thinking and hearing, because it's not just the expression and only feeling, it's also thinking how you organize the meaningfulness of your statement. regardless what the lyrics are or aren't in this case, or suggested or hinted by the mood. And that is for most pieces of music. Except, I would say, obviously, music that has a purpose that is in itself evident, like program music, film music, atmosphere music for the sake of the atmosphere that it's supposed to enhance while you watch the film, for instance. But the acting of the actor doesn't always need the music. As a matter of fact, when they shoot the film, they don't have the music. When they shoot the very scene that you will find the beautiful music or moving music enhance even more psychologically the character's expression, then it becomes that. The Cortot-like, if I want to be a little direct and not so subtle, of dislocation. It could be considered by some people lack of simplicity, like, why do you need to put makeup? It's beautiful like it is. There's an eye on the edge side, so it's right. You don't have to just see one eye and then you don't need to see the other. The repeat is part of the symmetry of the expression that goes beyond the 3 beats of harmonic progression, change in the left hand. Of course, he could have used some kind of arpeggio. Some kind of guitar sound like pluck, Spanish, and he would say, oh, that's a cliche. You see, it's so easy to get vulgar without even thinking about it. Sorry, I did. Hint, suggestion, evocation, evocación, reminiscence of a place, of a moment, perhaps, rather than atmosphere, perhaps a perfume, or all connected with a smile of somebody, or someplace, longing. At the very end of this short introductory piece, he interrupts the statement in major after the minor start, and you feel like perhaps there's some kind of a release of a tension, perhaps a hope. I mean, it's certainly not the Picardy third in Bach, which is probably more for acoustic reasons of the beats of the harmonics. But even if it isn't, major, minor have a mood setting, and he interrupts it with a 3rd degree, which should be in A flat major, C minor. And he uses the 3rd degree yet, but, yes, but rather yet, yes, but lowered. Twice in a row. In a way to say, in this apparent resolution in major happiness after the more melancholical opening, is still something that's going to develop in the storytelling to come. Is a first still chord in the whole piece. It's all syncopated accompaniment. He doesn't do. It's more like hold your breath, perhaps, or imagine if it was with the regular 3rd degree of A flat major in which he ends. So in this case, it's not tuning, it's not a dynamic range, it's not change of registration, it's not orchestral change of color, though it could be considered perhaps French horns, something that holds harmonically a warm sound, but coming from somewhere else, according to the harmonic atmosphere. It's already enough to go major tonic triad with 3rd degree, which is a minor triad, and common tones. But if it was course not in the same key and not in the same relations between tonic dominant. Here it's really 1-3 but flat 3, interrupting and restarting, and again re-interrupting, as if to say nothing is only happy or only sad. It's happiness with some kind of dark fear or memory or trauma. When I start explaining, it becomes trivial, and it's just hinted, and it's only what the altered chord can provoke as an atmospheric, therefore psychological something in our psyche when we listen, let less when we play. Haydn taught often in major key sonatas for the form to have before the coda and the recap a moment where you go on flat 6, which would be the ultimate surprise in C major, altered deceptive cadence delaying the finished, or in major, but of course in minor keys, principal minor keys, it doesn't work because anyway that's the 6th degree, but here in major should be, but instead, so that colorizes the major 2 tetrachord similar and totally symmetrical scale by adding something surprising. In the D major sonata by Beethoven, where he goes back in D major, he first in the development decides to go to B flat, which is flat 6 in D major. Chord is out of tune. But he could have gone dominant, then leading tone to relative minor. You would expect that, to use the relative minor, the 6th degree, but altered, or is the deceptive cadence in major, but on the flat 6 in minor. Well, it's not in minor, but it gives an impression of minor, since you have to have 3rd and 6th to be minor, not just the 3rd major. And this is half minor, major, minor. It's not about defining it only by degrees. It's, well, helps, but it's mostly anatomic, rather spiritual, rather soulful. Or so we appreciate it, or perhaps we're surprised by it, or perhaps the audacity of it escapes us in today's dissonances, which are way more fuller than that. But if we re-enter in the time period when Bach finishes that slow movement of the Italian concerto, he uses a diminished 3rd melodically, which is really a very chromatic, colorful in Greek, but tormented way to spin around the dominant. Rather, and the bass has the flat major 6th, then chromatically drop to real 6. So you have a dissonance provoked by the resonance. It's not played at the same time, and then the dissonance inside the interval. If it was, but and on top. Now dislocated like this and expressed, explained, it becomes redundant, because you go, it's really not much, I've heard way things before, after. You cannot take out from your cultural ear or what you've heard since. But if you want to play it, regardless of which instrument in terms of authenticity, but let's say you revisit it with a modern piano, you have to revisit it with their ears, their psyche, and what it meant for Bach to use all these effects in the last bar, or bar before last. The audacity of these things escapes us today because we amalgamate the styles we heard since that followed them. But if we immerse ourselves in how they were, I mean, it's not dramatic, it is just what it is. And if it was needing words, then that's why I don't find them. It's so clearer when you play it, or you hear it, or you feel it. Simplicity would be to do it strictly in tempo, but if you feel like you have to delay it, it's an interpretational choice. It's not written in the score. I mean, it could be hinted, but you cannot hint all these little dislocations in the score. Or then you become over picky as a notator rather than only the composer, the intent of the thought and the notation of the thought, and what is measured or unmeasured. The point of the notation is to be precise, so it replaces you once you're gone, so people can go through your musical thoughts and become their own while they played with your written text. And of course the written text can be misunderstood already in letters and words and languages and poetry and everything, or understood differently. Perhaps there are more ways than one to say the things that we are saying that were said by somebody else and that we say on his behalf or her behalf. Be believable, sincere and honest in your expression, often associated to naivete. Perhaps it is, but to play only what is written and consider that through this craftsmanship the artistry of the piece will appear. Sometimes we feel like we have to put some makeup to the piece, and then we lose a little bit of that simplicity that we are supposed to crave for. Not that the music is simple, but the expression of it. And the more you're aware of the different effects, the more you realize you have to dosage them, how you display them without them to become so meaningful that you lose the line. In a way, the decorations overbear on the Christmas tree. Interesting analogy, isn't it? With my eternal Christmas tree. Silly analogies come to mind. Thank you.